The stench of whiskey cut through the stale bus air like a knife. 8-year-old Mia pressed herself against the window, her bright eyes wide with fear. The red ribbons in her neatly braided hair trembled as she watched the drunk man stumble down the aisle through the reflection in the glass. His bloodshot eyes locked onto her. "People like you," he slurred, swaying dangerously close, "think you own everything." The words dripped with venom, cutting through the mechanical hum of the bus engine. No one moved, no one spoke. Just the rattle of wheels on pavement and the rasp of his breathing getting closer. Mia clutched her school bag tighter, her small knuckles turning white. "Answer me!" he roared. Then his hand struck her face. The sound echoed through the silent bus like a gunshot. But it wasn't the slap that made every passenger freeze. It was the low, dangerous voice that came from the back. "Big mistake." Logan Barrett rose from his seat, his 6 feet 2 inches frame, casting a shadow down the aisle. 15 years of military service had taught him to recognize threats, but nothing in his training could have prepared him for how this moment would spiral into the biggest conspiracy his city had ever seen. As he stepped toward the drunk man, his combat-trained eyes already mapping out exactly how this would end, he couldn't have known that this wasn't just a random act of violence. This was the beginning of something much darker. What happened in the next 3 minutes would shake an entire city to its core, and it all started with a little girl on a bus, wearing red ribbons in her hair. Want to know the truth? Stay with me, because this story's about to take a turn that no one saw coming. Logan Barrett had always been a man who thrived under pressure. A retired Navy SEAL, he spent over a decade navigating dangerous missions in hostile environments. His broad shoulders and muscular frame spoke of a man who had faced challenges most couldn't imagine. Yet even off the battlefield, Logan's instincts were as sharp as ever. That morning he had chosen to take the bus, a decision he rarely made. He wanted to blend into the crowd, seeking solace in the mundane after years of chaos. But peace was fleeting for someone like Logan. His eyes constantly scanned his surroundings, reading body language and assessing threats out of habit. When he boarded the bus, he noticed the drunk man immediately. Logan's trained eyes picked up the subtle sway in his movements and the aggression brewing in his slurred muttering. He clocked the man as a potential problem, but stayed seated, observing. It wasn't until the man started yelling at Mia that Logan's focus sharpened. The little girl didn't deserve the venom spewed at her, and the moment she was struck, Logan's restraint evaporated. As he approached the drunk man, every step was deliberate. His piercing gaze locked on the aggressor, unblinking and unrelenting. Logan's presence alone felt like a warning, a storm on the horizon. The drunk man shrank slightly under Logan's intense stare, his earlier bravado fading as Logan loomed over him. Logan didn't speak right away. He let the silence hang in the air, thick with tension, giving the man a chance to realize the gravity of his actions. In that moment, the bus wasn't just a vehicle, it was a battleground, and Logan was ready to stand as the protector of the innocent. The drunk man shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Logan stood before him. The passengers on the bus watched in tense silence, their eyes darting between the towering figure of Logan and the man whose slurred insults had poisoned the air. "You don't scare me," the man spat, though his voice wavered with uncertainty. He leaned back, trying to appear confident, but his drunken bravado was no match for Logan's composed intensity. Logan's eyes never left him. "Apologize to her," he demanded, his tone cold and commanding. The drunk man sneered, his face twisting with defiance. "She deserved it," he growled, his words dripping with venom, "sitting there like she owns the place." A collective gasp rippled through the bus. Mia, clutching her reddened cheek, stared up at Logan, her wide eyes filled with both fear and hope. The other passengers began to murmur, their earlier silence cracking under the weight of what they had just witnessed. Logan's jaw tightened. "You're going to regret that," he said, his voice low but fierce. He leaned in closer, his imposing frame making the drunk man visibly shrink. "Or what?" the man shot back, though the quiver in his voice betrayed him. Logan straightened to his full height, his fists clenched at his sides. The air felt heavier, as though everyone was holding their breath. "Or I'll make sure you remember this moment every time you think about hurting someone weaker than you." The passengers began to shift in their seats, their courage slowly igniting. A young woman at the back of the bus raised her phone, recording the confrontation, while an elderly man muttered, "It's about time someone stood up to people like him." The drunk man's confidence crumbled under the growing pressure. He looked around the bus, his eyes darting from face to face, searching for an ally. But there was none. The passengers, once too afraid to act, were now united behind Logan. The bus driver, finally realizing the situation, shouted from the front, "What's going on back there?" Logan didn't break his gaze from the man. "This man assaulted a child," he said firmly, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the passengers. The driver pulled the bus to a stop, his voice sharp as he called out, "Someone get the police on the line." Logan crouched down to Mia's level, his expression softening as he checked her face. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" he asked gently. Mia nodded hesitantly, tears brimming in her eyes. Logan's jaw tightened again as he rose to his feet, his protective instincts now fully ignited. The distant sound of sirens pierced the air, signaling that justice was on its way. The tension on the bus was palpable. Logan stood over the drunk man, his unflinching gaze locking the aggressor in place. The passengers, now emboldened, murmured among themselves, their fear replaced with a growing sense of unity behind Logan's stance. "You think your size or drunken rage makes you powerful?" Logan said, his voice calm but sharp, cutting through the man's weak defenses. "Real strength isn't about intimidation. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves." The drunk man, now visibly sweating, tried to regain some semblance of control. "It was just a misunderstanding," he stammered, his hands raised defensively. "I didn't mean to—" Logan cut him off with a sharp glare. "You don't misunderstand punching a child," he growled, his voice low but forceful. The man tried to rise from his seat, but Logan's firm hand on his shoulder pinned him back down. "You're not going anywhere," Logan said, his tone leaving no room for argument. From the back of the bus, a young woman stepped forward, her phone raised. "I've got it all on video," she said, her voice trembling slightly but resolute. "He's not getting away with this." The drunk man looked around desperately, his earlier arrogance evaporating into fear. The passengers had formed an invisible wall around him, their united stares making it clear he wouldn't escape accountability. The bus driver, a burly man with a commanding presence of his own, stepped into the aisle. "Hey, what's going on back here?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the scene. "That man hit this little girl," a middle-aged woman shouted from the front of the bus, her voice filled with anger. "He needs to be arrested." The driver's expression darkened. "Police are on their way," he said, pulling out his phone to confirm the call. The drunk man slumped in his seat, his bravado completely gone. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, trying to avoid the judgmental stares of the passengers. Logan leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Look at her," he said, gesturing toward Mia, who sat clutching her cheek as a kind, elderly woman comforted her. "She's 8 years old. You didn't just hurt her physically, you shattered her trust, and that's something you'll have to live with." The man looked up, his face pale. Logan's words carried a weight that no physical confrontation could match. "Do you have any idea what kind of man you've chosen to be?" Logan continued, his tone unrelenting. "You've shown everyone here the worst of yourself. Now you get to deal with the consequences." The passengers nodded in agreement, their voices growing louder with indignation. Some began calling out, voicing their disgust at the man's actions. The atmosphere shifted further, from fear to empowerment, as Logan's courage inspired the crowd. Mia let out a soft whimper, and Logan immediately turned his attention back to her. He knelt down, his rough hand surprisingly gentle as he held her tiny hand. "You're safe now, Mia," he said softly. "No one's going to hurt you again? I promise." The faint sound of approaching sirens grew louder, cutting through the rising noise on the bus. The passengers turned toward the windows, their tension beginning to ease as they saw the flashing lights. Logan stood tall again, his gaze never leaving the drunk man. "This is the part where you learn there are consequences," he said firmly, stepping back just enough to let the police handle the rest. The bus shuddered to a halt, and the sound of the sirens grew louder, echoing down the street. Passengers peered out the windows as 2 police cars pulled up, their flashing lights illuminating the dimly lit bus. The drunk man shifted nervously in his seat, his eyes darting around for an escape route. The bus driver opened the door, stepping outside to meet the officers. He gestured toward the back of the bus, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the passengers. Back there. The man hit a little girl, he explained. The officers stepped onto the bus, their presence commanding instant attention. One officer scanned the scene, taking in the faces of the passengers, the terrified little girl clutching her cheek, and Logan, who stood like a sentinel between Mia and the drunk man. That's him, Logan said, his voice steady and firm, pointing directly at the man. The drunk man raised his hands defensively, his face pale. Wait. This is a misunderstanding, he stammered, his voice trembling. I didn't mean to. You didn't mean to hit a child? The officer interrupted sharply, his gaze hardening. Stand up. The man hesitated, but the officer's authoritative tone left no room for argument. With slow, shaky movements, the drunk man stood, his bravado completely gone. The second officer moved behind him, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. You're under arrest for assault, the officer said firmly, snapping the cuffs onto the man's wrists. The sound of the metal clicking into place was met with murmurs of approval from the passengers. As the officers led the man toward the door, the bus erupted into a wave of quiet cheers and relieved sighs. Passengers turned to each other, their outrage giving way to a shared sense of justice. Mia sat silently, her small hand still cradling her cheek. An elderly woman beside her handed her a tissue, whispering soothing words. It's going to be okay, sweetheart. You're so brave. Logan crouched beside Mia again, his expression softening. Mia, he said gently, do you know your mom's phone number? Mia nodded, her voice barely above a whisper as she recited the number. Logan relayed it to one of the officers, who quickly made the call. The passengers began to settle back into their seats, but the tension in the air lingered. Logan remained by Mia's side, his protective presence offering her a sense of safety. As the drunk man was escorted off the bus and into the waiting police car, the officer turned back to Logan. We'll need your statement, Mr. Barrett, he said, his tone professional but respectful. Logan nodded. Of course, he replied. Outside, the flashing lights of the police cars reflected off the windows of the bus, a symbol of justice finally being served. The drunk man sat in the back of one of the cars, his head hanging low as the reality of his actions began to sink in. Logan glanced at Mia, who was now holding a juice box given to her by another passenger. Her small frame still trembled slightly, but her wide eyes were filled with gratitude as she looked up at him. You're safe now, Logan said quietly, his deep voice reassuring. No one is going to hurt you again. Minutes passed as the bus remained stationary, the weight of what had occurred hanging heavy in the air. Outside, the flashing lights of the police cars illuminated the street, signaling to passers-by that something serious had transpired. Inside, the atmosphere was quieter now, though emotions still simmered just beneath the surface. The sound of screeching tires broke the silence. A car pulled up hastily near the bus, and a woman in her early 30s stepped out. Her face was a mixture of fear and urgency as she ran toward the open bus doors. Mia, she called out, her voice cracking with emotion as she climbed aboard. Her eyes darted across the bus until they landed on her daughter. Mia's face lit up at the sight of her mother. Mommy, she cried, leaping from her seat and running into her mother's arms. Angela, her mother, dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms tightly around Mia, stroking her hair as tears streamed down both their faces. Oh, my baby, Angela whispered, her voice trembling. Are you okay? Did he hurt you? Mia nodded into her mother's shoulder, her small frame shaking as she finally let go of the tension she'd been holding. He hit me, Mommy, she said softly, her voice tinged with both fear and relief. Angela's expression shifted from relief to anger. She looked up, her sharp eyes scanning the bus until they landed on Logan. For a moment she hesitated, taking in his imposing figure and calm demeanor. Logan stepped forward, his tone respectful but firm. Your daughter is safe now, he said. The man who hurt her has been arrested, and the police are handling it. Angela's gaze softened as she processed his words. She looked at Mia again, her hands gently cradling her daughter's face to examine the redness on her cheek. You were so brave, she said, her voice filled with pride. Turning back to Logan, Angela's eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, she said sincerely. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here. Logan nodded, his expression steady. Anyone would have done the same, he replied humbly. Angela shook her head, her voice firm despite the emotion cracking through it. Not everyone, she said. You stood up for her when no one else did. That means everything to me. Passengers who were still on the bus began to chime in, their words of support directed at both Angela and Logan. He's a hero, one elderly woman said. It's about time someone stood up to people like that. A younger man added, We've got it all on video. The guy won't get away with this. Mia clung tightly to her mother as Angela rose to her feet, holding her daughter close. I'll make sure he pays for what he did, Angela said, her voice low but resolute. No one hurts my baby and gets away with it. The officer who had been speaking with Logan approached Angela, holding out a card. We'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to give your statement, he said kindly. We'll also need Mia's account, but we'll make it as easy as possible for her. Angela nodded, her composure returning as she listened. I'll do whatever it takes, she said. I want to make sure he's held accountable. Logan stood nearby, his protective instincts still on high alert. Angela noticed his quiet presence and turned to him once more. You're a good man, Mr. Barrett, she said softly. I can't thank you enough. Logan offered a small nod. I just did what was right, he said simply. As the bus finally began to empty, passengers stopped to offer Angela and Mia words of encouragement. Some paused to thank Logan for his bravery, but he deflected the praise, his focus remaining on Mia's well-being. Mia looked up at Logan as her mother led her toward the door. Thank you, Mr. Logan, she said softly, her small hand slipping into his. Logan crouched down to her level, his expression softening. You're a brave girl, Mia, he said gently. Don't ever forget that. The courthouse buzzed with quiet murmurs as Angela entered, holding Mia's hand tightly. Mia clutched her teddy bear, the soft fabric providing a small measure of comfort in the intimidating space. Angela's face was a mask of composure, but her tightened grip on Mia's hand revealed the tension beneath the surface. Logan was already there, standing near the entrance. His sharp eyes scanned the room, his presence as steady as ever. When Angela and Mia approached, he offered a small, reassuring nod. You didn't have to come, Angela said softly, though the relief in her eyes betrayed her gratitude. Yes, I did, Logan replied firmly. Mia needs to know she's not alone. The drunk man sat hunched over at the defendant's table, avoiding eye contact with anyone. His lawyer shuffled papers nervously, glancing toward the bench where the judge prepared to preside. The passengers who had recorded the incident were also present, ready to testify. The proceedings began with the prosecutor laying out the case. Video footage from the bus was presented, showing the man's actions in stark detail. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the video was played, the slap landing with a sickening echo that made the atmosphere heavy with tension. Angela sat quietly, her jaw clenched as she held Mia close. When it was her turn to speak, she rose to her feet, her voice steady but filled with emotion. My daughter is only 8 years old, Angela began, her gaze unwavering as she addressed the judge. She didn't deserve to be attacked for simply existing. This wasn't just an assault on her body. It was an assault on her innocence, her sense of safety in the world. Mia looked up at her mother with wide eyes, clutching the teddy bear tighter as Angela continued. No apology or excuse can undo the damage he's done, Angela said, her voice trembling slightly. But I hope this court will ensure that justice is served, so no other child has to experience what my daughter did. The judge listened intently, nodding solemnly as Angela's words hung in the air. The defendant's lawyer attempted to downplay the incident, citing his client's intoxicated state as a mitigating factor. But the judge's expression remained stern, his disapproval clear. When Logan was called to the stand, he spoke with the calm authority of someone who had spent years protecting others. I intervened because no child should ever have to endure something like that, he said. This wasn't just a random act of violence. It was a deliberate attack on someone vulnerable, and that's unacceptable. The courtroom fell silent as the judge prepared to deliver his verdict. His words were measured but firm. After reviewing the evidence and hearing the testimony, it is clear that the defendant's actions were both deliberate and egregious. He will be sentenced to 6 months in jail, mandatory counseling, and 200 hours of community service. A collective sigh of relief swept through the courtroom. Angela squeezed Mia's hand, tears welling up in her eyes as the weight of the ordeal began to lift. Logan, seated nearby, gave her a small nod of reassurance. As the defendant was escorted out in handcuffs, he avoided everyone's gaze, his earlier arrogance replaced by shame. The passengers who had come to testify exchanged relieved glances, their efforts validated by the outcome. Outside the courtroom, Logan knelt beside Mia, his voice gentle. "You did so well in there," he said. "You're stronger than you know." Mia nodded, her grip on the teddy bear loosening slightly. "Will he hurt anyone else now?" she asked quietly. "No, he won't," Logan said firmly. "Not after today." Angela joined them moments later, her expression one of quiet determination. "It's over," she said, more to herself than anyone else. Logan placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch reassuring. "You've done right by her," he said. "That's what matters most." Angela smiled at him, her gratitude evident. For the first time since the incident, she allowed herself to believe they could move forward, stronger than before. Weeks had passed since the courtroom drama, and life had started to return to a new normal for Angela and Mia. The memories of the incident lingered, but they were slowly transforming into a story of resilience. What neither Angela nor Mia had expected was how much Logan would become a part of their lives. It started with small gestures. Logan stopped by one evening to check on Mia after work. He brought along a small book about brave girls, something he thought she'd like. Mia had smiled for the first time in days when he handed it to her. Another time, Angela mentioned she was running low on groceries during a quick chat with Logan. The next morning, he showed up with a bag of essentials and even added Mia's favorite snacks. "Just thought I'd make it easier for you," he said with a humble shrug. Logan's presence became a source of comfort, not just for Mia but for Angela too. They started having casual dinners together, where Mia would eagerly ask Logan questions about his past. "Were you really a soldier, Mr. Logan?" she asked one evening, her eyes wide with curiosity. Logan chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair. "I was," he said. "I traveled a lot and worked with a team to help keep people safe." "Like a superhero?" Mia asked, her voice filled with awe. "Something like that," Logan replied with a small smile. Angela watched the exchange, her heart swelling with gratitude. Logan had a way of making them both feel safe, not through grand gestures, but in the small, consistent ways that mattered most. One crisp Saturday morning, Angela invited Logan over for breakfast. The smell of pancakes filled the apartment as Mia excitedly helped set the table. When Logan arrived, he brought a small potted plant, which Mia immediately placed next to her beloved teddy bear. The breakfast was warm and filled with laughter. Logan shared funny, carefully curated stories from his Navy SEAL days, making Mia giggle uncontrollably. Angela, watching from across the table, realized how much Logan had become a part of their lives. After breakfast, Logan suggested a walk in the park. Mia lit up at the idea, grabbing her jacket and skipping to the door. The park was alive with activity, children playing, dogs chasing balls, and couples strolling hand in hand. For the first time in what felt like forever, Angela saw Mia running and laughing, her spark returning. As they walked, Angela fell in step beside Logan. She glanced at him, her voice soft. "You've been good for her," she said. Logan looked thoughtful for a moment. "She's a special kid," he replied, "and you're an incredible mom. The strength you've shown through all this is inspiring." Angela smiled, her eyes glistening slightly. "I've had help," she admitted, her gaze meeting his. For a moment, the world seemed to pause, the connection between them undeniable. Before either could say more, Mia called out, pointing excitedly at a group of ducks near the pond. "Look, they're so funny!" Logan chuckled, breaking the moment. "Let's go see," he said, his voice light. The three of them moved toward the pond together. For a while, the world seemed normal again, the shadows of the past fading into the background. Angela realized something as they stood by the water, watching Mia toss breadcrumbs to the ducks. Logan wasn't just a protector anymore. He was a part of their lives, a steady presence that had brought them back from the edge of fear and uncertainty. As they headed back home, Mia skipped ahead, humming a tune. Angela and Logan walked side by side, their conversation easy and natural. For the first time in a long time, Angela felt a sense of hope for the future. That evening, Logan returned to his modest apartment, a quiet space that mirrored his solitary life. The walls were bare except for a single frame photograph on the mantel, a picture of his Navy SEAL team. Their faces were younger, determined, each one wearing a proud but weary smile. Logan poured himself a glass of water and sat at his small kitchen table, the events of the day replaying in his mind. The image of Mia's tear-streaked face haunted him. The fear in her wide eyes when the drunk man struck her stirred something deep inside. It wasn't just anger. It was a painful reminder of his own childhood, a time marked by violence and fear. His father's fists had left physical scars, but it was the emotional wounds that lingered. Logan leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. He had spent his entire adult life trying to be the opposite of the man who raised him. Joining the military had been his escape and his purpose. It taught him discipline and gave him a mission, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. But the incident on the bus reminded him that the battles worth fighting weren't always on foreign soil. The war against injustice at home was just as important, and it often felt more personal. He picked up the photograph of his team, tracing the faces of the men who had stood beside him in some of the most dangerous places in the world. "We fought for something bigger than ourselves," he muttered, his voice heavy with emotion. "But this is what it's really about." Logan's thoughts drifted back to Mia, her bravery in the face of fear, her quiet strength as she clung to her teddy bear, and her small voice thanking him. All of it reminded him why he had chosen this path. For years, Logan had carried the weight of his experiences alone. He was used to being a silent guardian, stepping in when needed, and fading into the background afterward. But something about Mia and Angela felt different. Their gratitude, their warmth, and the bond they had begun to build were unlike anything he'd experienced before. As he sat in the quiet of his apartment, Logan realized that protecting Mia had been more than an instinct. It had been a reminder of his purpose. The battle wasn't over, but it had changed. It wasn't just about stopping injustice. It was about building something better in its place. Logan took a deep breath, setting the photograph back on the mantel. The war zones might be behind him, but his mission was far from over. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was someone who could make a difference, one small act at a time. The morning sun streamed into Angela's apartment, casting a warm glow on the walls and filling the air with the comforting aroma of coffee and pancakes. Logan stood in the kitchen, his movements practiced and steady as he flipped the golden brown pancakes onto a plate. Mia sat at the table, her teddy bear propped up beside her, giggling as she tried to teach their new puppy, Lucky, a simple trick. Lucky wagged his tail enthusiastically, more interested in the pancake crumbs Mia occasionally dropped. Angela leaned against the doorway, her arms crossed and a soft smile playing on her lips. She hadn't seen Mia this happy and carefree in months, and the sight filled her heart with gratitude. Logan had become a part of their lives in a way she hadn't expected, but deeply appreciated. "Breakfast is served," Logan announced, setting a plate in front of Mia and another in front of Angela. He joined them at the table, his presence as steady and comforting as ever. Mia immediately dug in, chattering about her plans for the day. "Lucky's going to learn a new trick today, and then I want to draw pictures of ducks from the park," she exclaimed. Angela watched the interaction between Mia and Logan, her heart swelling. She couldn't help but marvel at how effortlessly Logan had integrated into their lives. He wasn't just a protector anymore. He was family. After breakfast, they decided to take their usual walk in the park. The crisp autumn air and golden sunlight made the world feel alive. Logan held Lucky's leash while Mia skipped ahead, chasing falling leaves and laughing. Angela fell in step beside Logan, her hand brushing against his. She glanced up at him, her voice soft. "You've done so much for us," she said, "more than I can ever repay." Logan looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "You don't owe me anything, Angela," he said sincerely. "Being here with you and Mia, it's given me something I didn't know I needed." Angela's heart swelled at his words. "Well," she said with a smile, "you're stuck with us now." Logan chuckled, his deep voice warm. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As they reached the pond, Mia ran back to them, pointing excitedly at a group of ducks. "Look, they're so funny," she exclaimed, her laughter filling the air. Logan and Angela walked toward the water, watching Mia toss breadcrumbs to the ducks. For a moment, it felt like the rest of the world didn't exist. just the three of them, together. The days turned into weeks, and Logan became a constant presence in their lives. He helped Mia with her homework, brought groceries when Angela needed them, and even started teaching Mia small self-defense techniques, ensuring she felt strong and confident. One evening, after Mia had gone to bed, Angela and Logan sat on the small balcony, sipping coffee as the city lights twinkled in the distance. The night air was cool, and the silence between them was comfortable. "You don't talk much about your past," Angela said gently, breaking the quiet. Logan took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "There's not much to say," he began. "The military taught me discipline and purpose, but it also showed me how fragile life can be." Angela nodded, her expression soft. "It's clear that protecting others is in your nature," she said. "You've done so much for us, Logan, more than I could have imagined." Logan turned to her, his eyes serious but kind. "You and Mia have given me something I didn't even know I was missing," he said. "A family." Angela's heart swelled at his words. She placed her hand on his, her touch gentle. "You've become a part of our lives, Logan," she said softly, "and I hope you'll stay." Logan looked at her, his expression thoughtful but full of quiet resolve. "As long as you'll have me," he replied. The following morning, the three of them walked to the park again, continuing what had become a weekend tradition. Mia skipped ahead, her laughter echoing through the crisp air, while Angela and Logan walked side by side, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. For the first time in a long time, Angela allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by fear or struggle, a future filled with love, hope, and the unshakable bond of a family that had found each other against all odds. As Mia ran back to them, holding up a leaf she had found, Logan smiled. He reached down and scooped her up, spinning her around as her laughter rang out. In that moment, under the golden sky, they all knew one thing for certain: they had found their forever.